Marcus Webb had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 diplomatic incidents that nearly started wars, and 1 memorable evening where he'd accidentally insulted a visiting alien dignitary by using the wrong pronoun, an error that had required 6 hours of delicate apology to resolve without bloodshed. None of that had prepared him for the Varathi. The transport shuttle descended through Cathara's turbulent atmosphere, with the kind of turbulence that suggested the planet itself was angry about his arrival. Marcus gripped the armrest and tried to review his briefing materials for the 18th time, though by now he'd memorized every word. Varathi Cultural Overview, Classified, Diplomatic Corps Eyes Only. The Varathi Empire operates under a fundamental principle known as Shareth, loosely translated as absolute truth or the way of honesty. This principle governs all Varathi communication, social interaction, and cultural expectations. Shareth requires complete honesty in all verbal and non-verbal communication. Lies, even social niceties or polite falsehoods, are considered the gravest form of dishonor. Varathi who violate Shareth are exiled or executed. Non-Varathi who violate it in official interactions are typically killed immediately. Diplomatic note: previous human diplomatic contact with Varathi has a 73% fatality rate. The primary cause of death is perceived dishonesty. Exercise extreme caution. Marcus closed the data pad and focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, trying to ignore the fact that he'd built his entire career on the art of saying things without actually saying them. Strategic ambiguity. Careful omissions. The diplomatic skill of being technically honest while revealing absolutely nothing. All of which would get him killed the moment he opened his mouth in front of a Varathi. Approaching landing zone, the pilot announced, her voice crackling through the intercom. Good luck, Mr. Webb, you're going to need it. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm being honest, the Varathi appreciate that right. The shuttle settled onto a landing platform carved from dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Through the viewport, Marcus could see the Varathi compound, a fortress that blended ancient architecture with technology centuries beyond human capabilities. Towers rose like broken teeth against a sky the color of old blood, and every surface bristled with weapons that tracked the shuttle with predatory precision. Welcome to Cathara, Marcus muttered, where everyone wants to kill you, but at least they're honest about it. He gathered his diplomatic case, checked his appearance in the shuttle's reflective surface, formal Earth Diplomatic Corps uniform, perfectly pressed, medals he'd earned through 16 years of not getting people killed, and tried to project confidence he absolutely didn't feel. The airlock hissed open, and heat hit him like a physical blow. Cathara's atmosphere was technically breathable for humans, but just barely. Too much nitrogen, not enough oxygen, and a sulfurous smell that made every breath taste like regret. A Varathi warrior waited at the base of the ramp. Marcus had seen them in briefing videos, but nothing prepared him for the reality. His cultural database suggested the ear positioning indicated female gender, stood at least 2 meters tall, her form encased in armor that seemed to shift colors in the dim light. The armor was beautiful in a deadly way, interlocking plates that suggested both ancient craftsmanship and impossible technology. But it was her ears that drew his attention. Long and pointed, sweeping back from her skull in an aggressive position that his briefings had specifically warned, meant either formal challenge or barely controlled hostility. Possibly both. Her eyes were silver, literally metallic-looking, and they fixed on Marcus with the focused intensity of someone deciding where to aim the first shot. Marcus Webb, she said, not a question. Her voice carried harmonics that his translator struggled with, rendering them as a slight echo. You are the human diplomat they sent to negotiate peace. Marcus descended the ramp carefully, aware that any misstep, literal or metaphorical, could be his last. I'm honored to. Do not lie, the words were flat, absolute. You are not honored, you are terrified. I can smell the fear sweat on you from here. Speak truth or do not speak at all. Every diplomatic instinct Marcus had screamed at him to deflect, to use careful language to mask his actual emotional state. But with Varathi, the usual rules were worse than useless. They were actively lethal. You're right, he said, forcing himself to meet those silver eyes. I'm terrified. Your species has killed 7 of the last 10 human diplomats sent to negotiate with you. I was specifically told that my predecessor lasted 4 days before saying something you considered dishonest and being executed for it. So yes, I'm absolutely terrified. But I'm here anyway because my government desperately needs a ceasefire, and apparently I'm the best option they have left. The Varathi warrior studied him for a long moment. Then, to Marcus's shock, her ears shifted slightly forward, an expression his briefing materials had tentatively identified as approval or interest. Better, she said. You speak truth about your fear rather than hiding it behind empty courtesy. This is progress. I am Commander Kirzha of the 3rd Legion. You will follow me. She turned and began walking toward the fortress without checking to see if Marcus was following. He hurried to keep up, his shorter legs struggling to match her longer stride. The compound interior was dimly lit, all dark stone and metal, with corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and vulnerable. Varathi warriors lined the walls, guards, Marcus assumed, though they could have been decorative statues for all the movement they made. Each one watched him pass with those silver eyes, evaluating, judging, finding him wanting. Your species, Kirzha said without turning around, has a reputation for dishonesty. You use words to obscure meaning to say one thing while intending another. You call this diplomacy. We call it cowardice. Marcus bit back his first response, a diplomatic deflection about cultural differences and the value of tact. With Varathi, that would be exactly the wrong approach. Some humans use language that way, he said instead. I've been trained to do exactly that for 16 years. It's how I've survived in situations where being blunt would have gotten people killed. And now you are in a situation where being anything other than blunt will get you killed. She glanced back at him. Can you adapt, or will you cling to your habits of deception until they destroy you? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I'm going to try. Trying is insufficient. You will either adapt or die. There is no middle ground with Shareth. They reached a meeting chamber that was somehow even more intimidating than the corridors. The room was circular, with a raised platform in the center where a single chair sat, clearly meant for Marcus. Around the perimeter, elevated positions looked down on the center, creating the impression of being in an arena or judgment circle. Kirzha gestured to the chair. Sit. I will return shortly. Wait, Marcus said before he could stop himself. How long is shortly? She paused in the doorway. As long as it takes me to prepare for our conversation. Why do you ask? Because in human diplomacy, making someone wait for extended periods is a power move, a way of establishing dominance. I'm trying to understand if that's what's happening here, or if you're being literal about returning shortly. Her ears shifted slightly, that forward position again. An honest question about cultural interpretation rather than passive acceptance of uncertain information. You learn quickly, Marcus Webb. She considered. I will return in approximately 1 of your hours. This is not a power move. I simply must consult with my superiors about how much information I am authorized to share with you. Use the time to prepare yourself. She left, and guards sealed the door behind her with a sound like breaking bones. Marcus sat in the provided chair and tried not to think about the fact that he was trapped in a fortress with warriors who could kill him without effort, on a planet where his entire species was considered barely more trustworthy than vermin. The hour stretched like elastic, each minute feeling like 10. Marcus reviewed his briefing materials again, though by now he could recite them in his sleep. He practiced responses to potential questions, trying to find ways to be honest without sabotaging his own negotiating position. The fundamental problem was simple. Varathi demanded absolute truth, but diplomatic success often required strategic omission. How could he negotiate a ceasefire while being completely honest about human weaknesses, about the limitations of his authority, about the political infighting that plagued the colonial government? He was still wrestling with that question when the door opened and Kirzha returned. She'd changed armor, or perhaps the same armor had shifted configurations. Marcus couldn't tell, but something was different about her bearing. More formal, perhaps, more dangerous. "We will begin," she announced, taking a position across from him rather than in one of the elevated observation seats. "Your government has requested negotiation for a ceasefire in the Cathara sector. State your terms." Marcus had prepared an opening statement, carefully crafted language that acknowledged Varathi territorial claims while maintaining human interests, suggested compromise without showing weakness, projected confidence while remaining open to negotiation. He looked at Kirzha's silver eyes and threw out every word of it. "I don't have terms," he said bluntly. "I have desperate hopes and very little authority. The colonial government sent me here with authorization to agree to almost anything short of complete withdrawal, because they're losing this conflict badly and they know it. The Varathi are superior in ground combat. You control 3 of the 4 strategic positions on this planet, and our military command estimates we have maybe 3 months before we're forced into a full retreat that will cost thousands of lives." Kirzha's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. "Continue. I'm supposed to negotiate for a ceasefire that preserves human dignity and territorial interests. But honestly, I'll settle for a ceasefire that stops the dying. I don't care about dignity. I don't care about territorial pissing contests. I just want to find a way for both our peoples to stop killing each other long enough to figure out if coexistence is possible." He stopped, slightly appalled at himself. That was possibly the least diplomatic opening statement in the history of interstellar relations. But Kirzha's ears had shifted fully forward now, an expression that Marcus was starting to recognize as genuine interest. "You admit weakness," she said. "You acknowledge your poor negotiating position. You confess that you lack authority to make meaningful decisions. Why would you reveal these things?" "Because lying about them would be stupid," Marcus replied. "You're not idiots. You know the tactical situation better than I do. Pretending I have a strong position when I obviously don't would just waste both our time and probably get me killed for dishonesty." "Your previous diplomat attempted exactly that strategy," Kirzha said. "He presented demands as if humans held superior position. He used elaborate language to obscure the weakness of your military situation. He lasted 4 days before his deceptions became impossible to tolerate. What happened to him? I killed him personally. It was a mercy. Others in my legion wanted him to suffer for the insult of his dishonesty." The casual admission should have terrified Marcus. Instead, he felt something almost like relief. At least he knew exactly where he stood. "Then I'll try not to insult you with dishonesty," he said. "Though I'll probably fail occasionally, because my entire professional training has been in strategic ambiguity. When I do, I'd appreciate you telling me before you kill me, so I can try to correct the mistake." For the first time since he'd arrived, Kirzha did something that might have been a smile. It was small, lasted maybe half a second, but it transformed her face from intimidating warrior to something almost approachable. "I will grant you that courtesy," she said. "One warning before execution. This is more than your predecessor received, but you have already shown more honesty than he managed in 4 days." "I'll take it," Marcus said. "Now, can we talk about why you're even bothering with negotiations? If your military position is as strong as I think it is, you could just kill all the humans on Cathara and take the planet. So why talk to me at all?" Kirzha settled into a position that looked uncomfortable to Marcus, but seemed natural to her physiology. "An honest question deserves an honest answer. We are negotiating because my superiors wish to understand human capabilities before committing to full military engagement. Your species is new to this sector, unpredictable in ways that concern our strategic command. They want intelligence about your technology, your decision-making processes, your breaking points. She paused, those silver eyes meeting his directly. I am speaking to you in part to gather that intelligence, to observe how humans think, how you respond to pressure, what truths you reveal when forced to abandon your typical deceptions. Do you understand? You're telling me that I'm basically an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as peace negotiations. Yes, and you're admitting this to my face. Shareth requires it. You asked an honest question. I provided an honest answer. Her expression shifted slightly. Does this anger you? Humans often become emotional when they learn they are being manipulated. Marcus considered. In any normal diplomatic situation, this revelation would be catastrophic. But with Varathi, the brutal honesty was somehow less insulting than the polite lies he was used to. I'm not angry, he said slowly. I'm actually kind of relieved. At least I know what I'm dealing with. In human diplomacy, everyone has hidden agendas, but we all pretend we don't. It's exhausting. Your way is more direct. Your way is cowardice masquerading as sophistication, Kirzha said bluntly. But you are correct that honesty has tactical advantages. I will always know where I stand with you if you commit to Shareth. Deception creates uncertainty, which creates inefficiency. They talked for 3 more hours, and it was the strangest diplomatic negotiation Marcus had ever experienced. Kirzha was brutally honest about Varathi military superiority, about their contempt for human deception, about the internal debates within her command structure, about whether humans were worth negotiating with at all. In return, Marcus found himself being more honest than he'd been in any professional capacity in his life. He admitted when he didn't know things. He confessed the limitations of his authority. He acknowledged that his government was fractured and disorganized, that the colonial administration was more focused on political infighting than effective governance. It should have been professional suicide. Instead, he saw Kirzha's respect growing with each honest admission, her ears slowly shifting from aggressive positioning to something more neutral, almost curious. You are not what I expected from human diplomats, she said as their session finally wound down. You lack the elaborate deceptions of your predecessor. You admit ignorance rather than inventing confident falsehoods. This is, she paused, searching for a word her translator could render. Refreshing. I'm too terrified to be clever, Marcus admitted. All my usual tricks would get me killed, so I'm just being honest and hoping that's enough. Fear that produces honesty is superior to confidence that produces deception. She stood, and Marcus rose as well. Return tomorrow. Same time, we will continue these discussions. That means I'm not being executed. Not today. You have not yet violated Shareth in ways that demand death. Continue as you have been, and you may survive long enough to be useful. It was possibly the nicest thing anyone had ever said to him in a professional context. As guards escorted Marcus back to the human diplomatic quarters, a bunker on the edge of the Varathi compound that was only slightly less depressing than a prison cell, he reflected on the strange day he'd had. He'd abandoned every diplomatic technique he'd ever learned. He'd admitted weakness, ignorance, and fear. He'd allowed a potentially hostile alien warrior to use him for intelligence gathering while being completely honest about it. And somehow, he was still alive. More than that, he was actually looking forward to tomorrow's meeting. Because for all her intimidating warrior bearing and casual admissions of violence, Kirzha was the most honest person Marcus had met in 16 years of diplomacy. In a career built on beautiful lies and strategic omissions, there was something almost addictive about absolute truth, even if that truth might eventually get him killed. The human diplomatic quarters smelled like recycled air and failure. Marcus sat on the narrow bed, calling it a cot would be generous, and reviewed his notes from the day's meeting. Except notes was too formal a word for what he'd scrawled. Fragmented observations about Varathi body language, reminders about which topics seemed to earn respect versus which prompted aggressive ear positioning, and one marginalized comment that simply read, "Don't lie about anything ever." His comm unit chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Marcus hesitated before opening it, knowing it would be his supervisor demanding a progress report. The colonial government wanted results, preferably yesterday, and they didn't particularly care about the complexities of Varathi cultural protocols. From Director Sarachin, Diplomatic Corps to Marcus Webb, Cathara posting RE. Status update required. Webb, need immediate report on negotiation progress. Colonial governor demanding timeline for ceasefire implementation. What concessions have you secured? What are Varathi asking in return? When can we expect preliminary agreement? Also receiving concerning reports about your negotiating approach. Multiple sources indicate you're being overly forthcoming about human tactical weaknesses. Please confirm you're maintaining appropriate diplomatic discretion. Marcus stared at the message, then began typing a response that was honest, deleted it, tried again with more diplomatic language, deleted that too. Finally he settled on, from Marcus Webb to Director Chen RE, status update. Negotiations proceeding. Varathi cultural protocols require absolute honesty. Strategic ambiguity is interpreted as dishonesty punishable by execution. Previous diplomatic approach contributed to Attaché Morrison's death. Am adapting strategy accordingly. No concession secured yet. Varathi are primarily gathering intelligence about human capabilities and decision-making processes. They have been completely transparent about this objective. Timeline uncertain. Will report progress as it develops. He sent it before he could second-guess himself, then immediately received a response. This approach is unacceptable. You are undermining our negotiating position by revealing weaknesses. Recommend immediate return to standard diplomatic protocols. That is an order. Marcus read the message 3 times, then carefully composed his reply. With respect, Director, standard diplomatic protocols will result in my execution within 24 hours. The Varathi species operates under principle of Shareth, absolute truth in all communication. They consider any form of deception, including polite omissions, to be capital offense. I can be honest and possibly useful, or I can be diplomatic and definitely dead. Please advise which you prefer. There was a long pause before the next message arrived. Fine. Continue current approach. But if this backfires, it's your career, not mine. Marcus smiled grimly. At least someone was being honest about covering their ass. He spent the evening studying more Varathi cultural materials, though the database was frustratingly incomplete. Humans had only been in contact with the Galactic Empire for about 8 years, and most of that contact had consisted of violent misunderstandings followed by hasty retreats. What little information existed painted a picture of a species that valued martial prowess, absolute honesty, and hierarchical discipline. They had no concept of white lies, no tolerance for social niceties that obscured truth, no patience for the kind of careful word crafting that Marcus had built his career on. They also, according to the limited anthropological data, had virtually no cross-species diplomatic relationships. The Varathi dealt with other species primarily through conquest or mutual non-interference pacts. The idea of actual alliance, of genuine cooperation beyond strategic necessity, seemed foreign to their culture, which made Marcus wonder, why were they even bothering with these negotiations? Kirsha had admitted they were gathering intelligence, but that didn't require extended diplomatic sessions. A few interrogations would be more efficient, unless there was something else going on. Something Kirsha hadn't mentioned yet, or perhaps wasn't authorized to reveal. Marcus filed that question away for tomorrow and tried to sleep. It didn't come easily. The next morning, Marcus was escorted back to the meeting chamber by the same silent guards. Kirsha was already waiting, her armor somehow different again, darker, with patterns that seemed to shift when Marcus wasn't looking directly at them. "You survived the night," she observed. "This is promising." "I'm as surprised as you are," Marcus replied, settling into his designated chair. "Though I did receive some concerning messages from my superiors. Apparently being honest with you is considered undermining our negotiating position." "What did you tell them?" "That I could be honest and possibly useful, or diplomatic and definitely dead." He paused. "Was that appropriate to share?" "I'm still learning where the boundaries are." Kirsha's ears shifted forward, that expression of approval he was beginning to recognize. "Sharing your superior's objections to Shareth demonstrates your commitment to honesty over political convenience." "This is appropriate." What was their response? "Basically fine, but if it doesn't work, we're blaming you. Your superiors are cowards who refuse responsibility for their own decisions." "Yes," Marcus agreed, surprised by his own bluntness. "Yes, they are. And yet you serve them. Why?" It was the kind of question that demanded real thought, real honesty. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Because the alternative is worse. If I refuse this assignment, they'll send someone else, someone less prepared, less willing to adapt to Varathi culture. That person will probably die, and the situation will escalate toward war that will kill thousands on both sides." He met her silver eyes. "I serve cowards because refusing to serve them would result in more death. It's not noble, it's just the least terrible option." Kirsha was silent for a long moment. "You understand the concept of duty beyond personal comfort. This is unexpected in a human. We're not all as bad as our reputation suggests. No, some of you are worse. But you," she paused, and Marcus could see her choosing words carefully. "You are different from what I expected. You acknowledge weakness without being weak. You admit ignorance without being incompetent. You show fear without being paralyzed by it." "Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation. Whether it is also a compliment depends on whether you continue to demonstrate these qualities or revert to typical human deception." They settled into the day's discussion, which ostensibly focused on territorial boundaries, but kept veering into deeper philosophical territory. Marcus found himself talking about human concepts of honor, about the difference between lying and discretion, about why his species valued social harmony even when it required small deceptions. Kirsha challenged every point, forcing him to defend positions he'd never questioned before. Why was it considered polite to lie about "we value feelings," he tried to explain. "Sometimes being kind is more important than being truthful. If my friend's child draws a terrible picture, I'll say it's beautiful because the child's confidence matters more than my honest artistic assessment." "So you teach your young that deception is acceptable if it serves emotional comfort." Kirsha's ears flattened slightly, disapproval. "This explains much about human diplomatic failures." "What do Varathi do in that situation?" "We tell the child that their technique is poor but can be improved with practice. We offer specific guidance for development. We do not lie to preserve feelings. We provide honest assessment that allows growth." "That sounds harsh for a child." "It produces adults who are not crippled by false confidence or unexpected reality. Your kindness is often cruelty disguised as care." Marcus wanted to argue, but he couldn't entirely disagree. How many human disasters stemmed from polite lies that prevented necessary truth-telling? "Our cultures are fundamentally incompatible," he said finally. "You value truth above all else. We value social harmony even when it requires dishonesty. How are we supposed to coexist when our basic communication styles are mutually exclusive?" "That," Kirsha said, "is the actual question these negotiations must answer. Not territorial boundaries or resource allocation. Those are simple problems. The real question is whether species with incompatible values can find common ground, or whether we are destined for conflict because we cannot understand each other's fundamental assumptions about reality. It was the most philosophical thing she'd said, and it struck Marcus as deeply true. They weren't really negotiating a ceasefire. They were negotiating whether two species could tolerate each other's existence. Can they? He asked. Find common ground, I mean. I do not know. You are the first human I have spoken with extensively. Before you, I believed all humans were fundamentally dishonest, that your species was incapable of Shareth. You are proving that assumption incomplete. Just incomplete, not wrong. You are one human. An outlier, perhaps. I cannot extrapolate from a single data point to conclusions about your entire species. She tilted her head, an expression Marcus was learning meant curiosity. Are you representative of human capability, or are you exceptional? I'm painfully average, Marcus admitted. If I'm managing Shareth, it's only because I'm too terrified to be clever. A braver human would probably try diplomatic maneuvering and get themselves killed. A smarter one might find ways to be honest while still protecting human interests. I'm just surviving on fear and luck. Fear that produces appropriate behavior is functionally equivalent to wisdom. You should not discount its value. They talked for hours, the conversation ranging from practical ceasefire terms to abstract questions about truth and deception. Marcus found himself increasingly comfortable with Kirsha's directness, even when she said things that would be considered incredibly rude in any human context. When she told him his government's resource management was incompetent to the point of comedy, he didn't take offense, because she was right, and her bluntness was oddly refreshing after years of carefully phrased diplomatic criticism. When she described human emotional expression as inefficient and distracting, he found himself laughing instead of being insulted. You find my assessment humorous? She asked, ears tilting in confusion. I find your honesty refreshing. In human diplomacy, if someone thinks your culture is inefficient, they spend 20 minutes explaining why your approach has interesting alternative merits before gently suggesting improvements. You just say we're inefficient. It's almost relaxing. Relaxing to be insulted. Relaxing to know exactly where I stand. With you, I never have to wonder what you really think or decode hidden meanings. You just tell me. He searched for the right word, honest, obviously, but also kind in its way. You're not wasting my time with polite fictions. Kirsha's expression shifted into something Marcus couldn't quite read. You are the first human to describe Varathi directness as kind. Most find it brutal, offensive, unbearable. Most humans are used to comfortable lies. I'm starting to think uncomfortable truth might be better. This is significant progress in your understanding of Shareth. She stood, signaling the end of their session. Return tomorrow. I wish to continue these discussions. I'll be here, Marcus said, also rising. Assuming I survive the night again. You will survive. I am beginning to find these conversations valuable. Killing you would be inefficient. It was possibly the nicest thing she'd said to him, and Marcus found himself smiling as guards escorted him back to his quarters. Over the next week, the pattern continued. Daily meetings that started as ceasefire negotiations and evolved into something more complex, cultural exchange, philosophical debate, the slow building of understanding between beings from fundamentally different worlds. Marcus learned to read Varathi body language with increasing accuracy. The ear positions that indicated everything from mild curiosity to lethal aggression. The subtle shifts in posture that suggested agreement or skepticism. The particular tone that meant Kirsha was about to challenge one of his assumptions and force him to defend it. He also learned things about Varathi culture that weren't in any briefing materials. That they had elaborate poetry traditions focused on battlefield victories. That their concept of family was more about warriors fighting together than biological connection. That they considered human romantic relationships baffling and somewhat embarrassing. All that emotional vulnerability displayed publicly seemed indecent to them. We do not share feelings as you do, Kirsha explained during one conversation. Emotions are private, not public performances. When Varathi mate, it is direct. Attraction is acknowledged, compatibility is assessed, bonds are formed. Your human courtship rituals, the games, the uncertainty, the elaborate deceptions about interest levels, this is incomprehensible to us. We call it romance, Marcus said. The uncertainty is part of the appeal, not knowing if feelings are returned, building tension. You build tension by lying about your feelings. Not lying exactly, more like. Not revealing them immediately. That is lying. Kirsha's ears flattened. You deliberately conceal truth about your emotional state to create artificial uncertainty. This is deception. Marcus wanted to argue, but from a Varathi perspective, she was right. Human dating was basically an elaborate game of strategic dishonesty. Okay, he admitted. You've got a point. But doesn't that make Varathi relationships kind of transactional? Where's the excitement if you just tell someone you're attracted and they immediately confirm or deny? The excitement is in the honesty, in knowing that when someone expresses interest, it is genuine, in trusting that acceptance or rejection is based on truth, not game playing. She paused. Your way seems exhausting. All that effort to hide what you feel, to decode what others feel. Why not simply speak truth and act on it? Because rejection is scary, Marcus said quietly. If you tell someone you're interested and they say no, that's final. There's no ambiguity to hide behind, no hope that maybe they just haven't realized their feelings yet. It's just no. And this is preferable to uncertainty, to not knowing if the person you desire feels the same. For a lot of humans, yes, uncomfortable uncertainty is better than definite rejection. Kirsha was quiet for a long moment. Your species is more cowardly than I realized. It should have been an insult, but Marcus found himself laughing. Yeah, we really are. Something shifted in her expression, that brief almost smile he'd seen a few times before. You do not defend your species when I criticize them. Because you're usually right. Humans are cowardly about feelings. We lie to ourselves and others to avoid uncomfortable truths. It's not admirable, but it's how we operate. You are not like that. I'm exactly like that, Marcus corrected. I'm just temporarily unable to be like that because your culture would kill me for it. If I were home, I'd be just as dishonest as any other human. I do not believe that. You have adapted to Shareth more quickly and completely than any human I have observed. This suggests natural inclination toward honesty, not merely fear-driven compliance. Marcus considered that. Was she right? Had he always been uncomfortable with diplomatic deception, just too invested in his career to acknowledge it? Maybe, he said slowly. Or maybe I just like talking to you enough that I don't want to ruin it by lying. The words hung in the air between them, more honest than Marcus had intended. He just admitted that their conversations mattered to him personally, not just professionally. Kirsha's ears shifted into a position Marcus hadn't seen before, not quite forward, not quite neutral, something in between that might have indicated surprise or uncertainty. You enjoy our discussions, she said, not a question. Yes. More than I've enjoyed any diplomatic negotiation in 16 years. He decided to commit to honesty fully. You're brilliant, challenging, and completely unpredictable. Talking to you is exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. I look forward to these meetings for reasons that have nothing to do with ceasefire terms. Her silver eyes held his, and Marcus saw something in them he couldn't identify. Some emotion or thought that her warrior's bearing didn't reveal. I also find these discussions valuable beyond their diplomatic purpose, she said carefully. You challenge my assumptions about humanity. You demonstrate qualities I did not believe your species possessed. You are. She paused, searching for words. Interesting. It was possibly the most emotionally vulnerable thing he'd ever heard her say. They sat in silence for several heartbeats, and Marcus became aware that something had shifted between them. Some boundary had been crossed without either of them consciously choosing to cross it. They weren't just diplomat and warrior anymore. They were, what? Friends seemed too simple. Professional colleagues didn't describe it either. Something else, something neither of their cultures had good words for. "We should continue tomorrow's session," Kirzha said finally, standing in a way that suggested the conversation had reached some limit she wasn't ready to exceed. "Yes," Marcus agreed, also rising, "tomorrow." But as he returned to his quarters that evening, Marcus found himself thinking less about ceasefire terms and more about the way Kirzha's expression had shifted when he'd admitted to enjoying their conversations. About the fact that she'd called him interesting, which coming from her might be the equivalent of a human calling someone fascinating. About the uncomfortable realization that he was starting to see her as more than just a diplomatic contact or even a friend. He was attracted to her. The thought was absurd. She was Varathi, alien, warrior from a culture that found human emotional expression embarrassing. She could kill him without effort. Their entire relationship existed within a context of potential violence and certain cultural incompatibility. And yet, when she challenged his ideas, he felt energized rather than defensive. When she smiled that rare brief smile, something in his chest tightened. When her silver eyes met his with that intense focus, he found himself wanting to hold that gaze longer than professionalism required. It was completely inappropriate, professionally suicidal, and probably biologically absurd. He had no idea if Varathi even experienced attraction the way humans did, or if the concept of cross-species romantic interest existed in their culture. Marcus fell asleep trying to convince himself it was just the isolation talking, the stress of the mission creating false emotional attachment. He wasn't very convincing. The 8th day of negotiations began like all the others. Guards escorted Marcus to the meeting chamber. Kirzha was already waiting, and they settled into their designated positions with the practiced ease of routine. Except nothing felt routine anymore. Marcus had spent the night wrestling with his growing awareness of feelings that had no place in diplomatic negotiations. He told himself a dozen times that attraction to an alien warrior who could snap him like a twig was the height of stupidity. That he was confusing respect with something more. That isolation and stress were playing tricks on his emotions. None of it had been convincing. Now, sitting across from Kirzha, Marcus found himself noticing things he shouldn't notice. The way her armor caught the light, creating subtle color shifts across its surface. The graceful efficiency of her movements, every gesture purposeful and controlled. The intensity of her focus when she listened, like his words were the only thing in the universe that mattered. "You are distracted today," Kirzha observed, her ears tilting in that expression of curiosity. "Your attention wanders. Why?" Marcus's first instinct was to deflect, to claim fatigue or concern about the negotiations. But that would be a lie, and lies with Kirzha were potentially fatal. "I'm thinking about things beyond our negotiations," he said carefully. "Personal matters that aren't relevant to the ceasefire discussions. All matters are potentially relevant. Shareth requires complete honesty, not selective truth." She leaned forward slightly. "What occupies your thoughts?" This was dangerous territory. Marcus could feel it like a physical presence in the room, the moment where honesty might cross into confession, where professional boundaries might dissolve into something neither of them was prepared for. "I'm trying to figure out how to separate professional respect from personal feelings," he said, choosing his words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. "It's difficult when working closely with someone for extended periods." Kirzha's ears shifted, not aggression, but something Marcus couldn't quite identify. "You are developing emotional attachment beyond professional connection." To whom? The direct question shouldn't have surprised him. Varathi didn't do subtle inquiry or gentle probing. They just asked. Marcus could lie, could claim he was thinking about someone back home, redirect the conversation away from dangerous truth. But that would violate everything they'd built over the past week. Every moment of honesty, every careful disclosure, every step toward mutual understanding would be betrayed by one strategic lie. "I'd rather not answer that question," he said instead. "Not because I want to lie, but because the honest answer creates complications I'm not ready to address. Refusing to answer is still a form of dishonesty. It conceals truth. Then I'm in an impossible position. Answer honestly and create problems, or refuse to answer and violate Shareth. There's no good option." Kirsha studied him with those silver eyes, and Marcus could see her thinking, processing, reaching some conclusion he couldn't anticipate. "The personal feelings you are experiencing," she said slowly, "they involve me." It wasn't a question, just a statement of observed fact, delivered with characteristic Varathi directness. Marcus felt his heart rate spike, felt heat in his face that was probably visible to her enhanced senses. Every diplomatic instinct screamed at him to deny, to deflect, to find some clever way to redirect the conversation. But he'd committed to honesty, even especially when it was terrifying. "Yes," he said quietly, "they involve you." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, gravity pulling at him. The ground so far below it might as well not exist. Kirsha's expression didn't change, but her ears shifted through several positions rapidly. Surprise, consideration, something else Marcus couldn't read. She stood abruptly, and he fought the instinct to flinch. "This is," she paused, turned away from him, "unexpected, complicated. I know, which is why I didn't want to address it. It's inappropriate, professionally destructive, and probably offensive to your culture." Marcus remained seated, his hands gripping the chair arms to keep them from shaking. "I apologize if acknowledging it has made you uncomfortable." "I am not uncomfortable." She turned back to face him, and there was something in her expression he'd never seen before, uncertainty, maybe, or confusion. "I am uncertain how to respond. Varathi do not experience." She stopped, started again. "We are not accustomed to emotional complications in professional relationships. Neither are humans, technically. We're just better at pretending they don't exist. And now you cannot pretend because Shareth requires honesty." Her ears flattened slightly. "This is a problem." "Yes, we must address it, or it will interfere with our negotiations." "Probably." Kirsha moved to the observation window, the only one in the chamber, showing the harsh landscape of Kethara beyond the compound walls. She stood there for a long moment, her back to Marcus, perfectly still in that way she had when thinking deeply. "Among Varathi," she said finally, "when such feelings arise, we address them directly. State the attraction, assess compatibility, make decision to pursue or decline. There is no ambiguity, no drawn-out uncertainty. This is efficient." "That sounds terrifying from a human perspective." "Your way is more terrifying. You hide feelings, create elaborate games of uncertainty, suffer through not knowing if attraction is mutual. How is that preferable? It gives you plausible deniability. If you never say what you feel, you can never be definitively rejected." "Cowardice." She turned back to face him. "But you have already spoken truth. You have acknowledged feelings. By Varathi standards, you have initiated the process. I must now provide honest response." Marcus's mouth went dry. "You don't have to. This isn't. I wasn't trying to initiate anything. I was just being honest because you asked. Intention is irrelevant. You have spoken truth about attraction. I am required by Shareth to respond with equal truth." She moved closer, and Marcus had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. "I have also experienced feelings beyond professional respect. You interest me in ways I did not anticipate. Your mind challenges mine. Your honesty, however difficult it is for you to maintain, demonstrates courage. Your presence has become," she paused, searching for words, "something I look forward to beyond its diplomatic utility." The confession hung in the air between them, as honest and direct as everything else she said. No poetry, no romantic language, just truth delivered with characteristic Varathi bluntness. It was possibly the most romantic thing Marcus had ever heard. "So we're both attracted to each other," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "Now what? Now we must decide if we pursue this attraction, or set it aside in service of our professional obligations. Can we do both? Keep things professional while acknowledging that there are personal feelings underneath?" "I do not know. Varathi do not have experience with this type of situation. We do not typically form emotional attachments to other species." "Humans don't either," Marcus admitted. "There are protocols against diplomatic personnel becoming romantically involved with their negotiating counterparts. It's considered a massive conflict of interest. Then we are both violating our respective cultures' expectations merely by having this conversation." "It seems like it." They stood there, Marcus still seated, Kirsha looming over him but somehow not threatening, both grappling with a situation neither had been trained for. "I must consult with my superiors," Kirsha said finally. "This situation requires guidance beyond my authority." Panic spiked through Marcus. "Wait, you're going to tell them about the attraction? Shareth requires honesty in all communications. I cannot conceal this from my command structure." "But I don't know what they'll do, but it can't be good. They might remove you from negotiations, or execute me as a corrupting influence, or they will respond according to Varathi protocols. I cannot predict what those protocols are because this situation is unprecedented." She moved toward the door. "But concealing truth would be greater violation than whatever complications honesty creates. My career will be destroyed if my superiors find out." "Then do not tell them." "But you'll tell yours." "I must. Lying to my commanders would violate Shareth and dishonor my position." She paused at the door. "Your species allows strategic deception of superiors." "Not allows exactly, but we don't have cultural requirements for complete honesty in all situations. I can choose what to report and what to keep private." "This is the fundamental difference between our species. We cannot understand how you tolerate such pervasive dishonesty." She opened the door, guards appearing instantly. "I will return tomorrow with my superior's guidance. You should use this time to decide what you wish to do with these feelings we have acknowledged." She left, and Marcus sat alone in the chamber, his mind racing through implications and consequences. He just confessed attraction to an alien warrior. She'd confessed mutual attraction. She was now reporting this to her military command, who would make decisions that would affect both their lives based on criteria Marcus couldn't begin to understand. And he had to decide whether to report it to his own superiors, knowing it would likely end his diplomatic career and possibly get him recalled to Earth in disgrace. Honesty versus self-preservation. Truth versus strategic silence. Shareth versus every professional instinct he developed over 16 years. Marcus returned to his quarters and stared at his comm unit for an hour before finally composing a message from Marcus Webb to Director Chen Re, personal complication. Situation has developed that may affect negotiations. Will provide full report when I better understand implications. Request guidance on protocols regarding diplomatic personnel, developing personal connections with negotiating counterparts. It was vague enough to maintain some deniability, while being honest enough that he wouldn't feel like a complete hypocrite. A compromise between Shareth and human diplomatic practice. Chen's response was immediate. "What kind of personal connections? Be specific." Marcus stared at the message, knowing that specificity would doom him. He could lie, claim it was just friendly rapport building. Could minimize the situation, frame it as professional respect that his superiors were misinterpreting. Or he could be honest and face the consequences. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before he finally typed. "Mutual attraction between myself and Varathi, Commander Kirsha, has developed during negotiations. Both parties have acknowledged this openly. Awaiting Varathi command guidance on how to proceed. Request human protocols for similar situations." He sent it before he could reconsider, then immediately regretted it. His career was finished. Earth Diplomatic Corps had strict rules against romantic involvement with diplomatic contacts, especially when those contacts were from potentially hostile species. Chen's response took 3 hours, which Marcus spent contemplating the various ways his life was about to be destroyed. From Director Chen to Marcus Webb. Are you out of your mind? Romantic involvement with Varathi commander during active ceasefire negotiations is career suicide. Immediate recall recommended. Stand by for replacement diplomat. However, colonial governor has reviewed situation and determined that your removal now would jeopardize ongoing negotiations. You are ordered to maintain professional distance, discontinue all personal relationship development, and focus exclusively on diplomatic objectives. This is a direct order, Webb. Follow it or face court-martial. Marcus read the message 3 times, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. They were ordering him to lie. Not explicitly. They'd phrased it as maintaining professional distance. But the effect was the same. They wanted him to pretend the attraction didn't exist, to go back to purely professional interactions, to conceal truth in service of diplomatic convenience. Which was exactly what humans did. Exactly what Kirzha had identified as their fundamental cowardice. He could follow orders, protect his career, maintain the comfortable fiction that he and Kirzha were nothing more than diplomatic counterparts. Or he could commit fully to Shareth, even if it meant defying his own command structure. Marcus spent the rest of the day wrestling with the decision. By evening, he'd reached a conclusion that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He was going to be honest. Completely, devastatingly honest. Whatever consequences followed, career destruction, court-martial, complete professional ruin, he would face them rather than betray the principles he'd been living for the past week. Because Kirzha was right. Humans were cowards about truth. They hid behind comfortable lies and called it civilization. But Marcus had discovered something in his week of Shareth. Honesty was harder than deception, but it was also cleaner. More real, more alive. Even if it destroyed him, he wouldn't go back to strategic ambiguity and diplomatic word games. He'd rather be honest and ruined than dishonest and safe. The decision settled over him like armor, uncomfortable but necessary. He slept better than he had in days. The 9th morning arrived with the weight of consequence. Marcus was escorted to the meeting chamber as usual, but this time Kirzha wasn't alone. 3 senior Varathi officers stood with her, older warriors whose armor bore honors that suggested centuries of service. Their silver eyes fixed on Marcus with varying expressions of curiosity, skepticism, and what might have been hostility. Marcus's heart hammered, but he kept his expression neutral as he took his designated seat. Marcus Webb, the eldest warrior began, her voice carrying authority that made Kirzha seem almost junior by comparison. I am General Sarethkin. Commander Kirzha has reported an unusual development in your negotiations. Before we address it, I require confirmation from you. Have you developed personal attraction to Commander Kirzha? Direct. No preamble, no diplomatic softening, just the question. Marcus took a breath and committed to his decision fully. Yes, General, I have. And you acknowledge this knowing it violates your species' professional protocols. Yes. Why did you not conceal it? Your superiors could not have known if you had maintained appropriate discretion. Because concealing it would violate Shareth. I've spent the past week learning to value honesty over strategic deception. I won't abandon that principle now, even if honesty is professionally destructive. The general's ears shifted, forward, interested. You would sacrifice your career for adherence to Varathi cultural principles. I would sacrifice my career to avoid being a hypocrite. I've criticized human dishonesty repeatedly during these negotiations. It would be profoundly dishonest to then practice exactly that dishonesty when it became convenient. General Sarethkin turned to Kirzha. Your assessment of the human's commitment to Shareth. Genuine, Kirzha said without hesitation. He struggles with honesty because his training opposes it, but he consistently chooses truth over comfort. This confession supports that pattern. And you have also developed attraction to him. Yes, General. Despite initial skepticism about his species, I find myself interested in him beyond professional context. His mind challenges mine. His commitment to honesty, however difficult for him, demonstrates courage worthy of respect. The general studied them both, her expression unreadable. This is unprecedented. Varathi do not form emotional bonds with other species. It suggests either exceptional circumstances or profound failure in judgment. Marcus kept silent, knowing that defending himself would likely make things worse. However, the general continued, Shareth requires us to address truth honestly rather than suppress it because it is inconvenient. You have both acknowledged mutual attraction. This truth exists regardless of whether we approve. The question is how we respond to it. She turned to one of the other officers. Commander Thalen, your analysis. The second warrior, male, with scars suggesting extensive combat experience, spoke in measured tones. From strategic perspective, this attraction creates leverage. If human diplomat is emotionally invested in Commander Kirzha's well-being, it makes him more cooperative, easier to manipulate toward favorable terms. That is calculating but not honest, the general said. Shareth does not permit exploitation of emotional vulnerability, even in enemies. With respect, General, the human is not our friend either. Using available leverage is standard practice. Not when that leverage violates the principles we claim to uphold. She turned to the third officer. Commander Vera, your thoughts. The third warrior, female, younger than the others but still clearly experienced, considered before speaking. I find myself curious about this development. If human and Varathi can form genuine emotional connection, it suggests our species are less fundamentally incompatible than we believed. This could have implications beyond these negotiations. You propose what? Cross-species emotional bonding as diplomatic strategy. I propose we do not suppress truth, because it is uncomfortable or unprecedented. That would violate Shareth more profoundly than any emotional complication. The general was silent for a long moment, her ears moving through various positions as she considered. Finally, she addressed Marcus and Kirzha together. This situation requires testing. You will both remain in your current positions. Negotiations will continue, but the personal attraction you have acknowledged will not be suppressed or concealed. Doing so would violate Shareth. Instead, you will address it honestly. If it strengthens your connection and improves diplomatic outcomes, we will consider it beneficial. If it creates destructive complications, we will intervene. She focused on Kirzha specifically. You are ordered to pursue honesty in all aspects of this relationship. If the attraction deepens, acknowledge it. If it proves incompatible with professional duties, admit that. No concealment, no strategic manipulation. Complete transparency. Yes, General. Then to Marcus. Your superiors have ordered you to maintain professional distance. What will you do? I will maintain honesty, Marcus said quietly. My superiors' orders require dishonesty, pretending feelings don't exist, concealing truth for strategic advantage. I can't do that anymore. I'll face whatever consequences they impose, but I won't lie about this. Even if it destroys your career. Even then, the general's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. You have committed to Shareth more completely than any human I have observed. This is either profound courage or spectacular foolishness. Time will reveal which. She gestured to her fellow officers. We will report to High Command that negotiations continue under unusual but potentially valuable circumstances. Commander Kirzha, proceed as you see fit. But remember truth in all things or you dishonor your position. The senior officers departed, leaving Marcus and Kirzha alone in the chamber. They sat in silence for several heartbeats, both processing what had just occurred. "That went better than I expected," Marcus said finally. "My superiors value Shareth above comfort. They will not suppress truth simply because it is complicated." Kirzha studied him carefully. "You defied your own command structure. This will have severe consequences for you." "Probably, but I couldn't do what they asked. Couldn't pretend this doesn't exist just because acknowledging it is inconvenient. You have become more Varathi than human in your commitment to honesty. I've become someone I can actually respect. That's worth whatever consequences follow." Kirzha's expression shifted into that small, almost smile he'd come to value. "You are remarkable, Marcus Webb. Your species is cowardly about truth, but you individually have chosen courage. This is," she paused, "attractive in ways I did not anticipate." "Now what?" Marcus asked. "Your generals said we should address this honestly. What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means we do not hide what we feel. We acknowledge it, explore it, determine if it can coexist with our professional obligations." She stood, moved closer to him. "It means I stop pretending that your presence does not affect me beyond diplomatic interest. And I stop pretending I'm here purely for ceasefire negotiations." "Truth," she agreed. They stood close enough that Marcus could see the subtle texture of her skin, the slight color variations that human eyes almost couldn't detect. She was alien, unmistakably other, and also somehow the most present person he'd ever encountered. "I don't know how this works," he admitted. "Human Varathi attraction. I don't even know if our physiologies are compatible, or if what you experience as attraction translates to what I experience." "Neither do I. We will discover together." She reached out slowly, giving him time to move away, and touched his face with careful precision. Her fingers were cool, textured differently than human skin, but the gesture was unmistakable. Exploration, curiosity, the tentative beginning of something neither could name. Marcus's breath caught. Her touch sent electricity through him, his own hand rising to cover hers where it rested on his cheek. "This is terrifying," he said quietly. "Truth often is. But it is also real in ways comfortable fiction can never be." They stood like that, touching carefully, both aware they were crossing boundaries that couldn't be uncrossed, both choosing to do it anyway because the alternative, suppression, denial, strategic dishonesty, had become intolerable. Whatever happened next, professional consequences, cultural complications, the thousand practical problems inherent in cross-species attraction, they would face it honestly, together, because some things were worth the risk, worth defying orders and disappointing superiors, and accepting that the easy path was no longer available. Some things demanded courage. And standing in that meeting chamber, Kirzha's hand against his face and his hand covering hers, Marcus felt braver than he'd felt in 16 years of careful diplomatic dishonesty. Truth was terrifying, but it was also liberating, and whatever came next, at least it would be real. The atmosphere in the meeting chamber had fundamentally changed. Where before there had been formal distance, careful positioning, the structured boundaries of diplomatic negotiation, now there was something else. Something neither of them had language for. Kirzha's hand remained on Marcus's face, her cool fingers exploring the topology of human features with scientific curiosity mixed with something deeper. Marcus stood perfectly still, acutely aware that she could break him without effort, that this moment of gentleness was a choice she was making, not a biological imperative. "Your skin is warmer than ours," she observed, "and softer. Varathi epidermis is more durable. We evolved on a harsher world than yours. Does it bother you, the difference?" "No, it interests me." Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone in what might have been accidental or might have been deliberate. "I have touched many beings in combat. This is the first time I have touched someone to understand them rather than harm them. The experience is strange. Strange good or strange bad. Simply strange, new." Her silver eyes met his directly. "Is this appropriate by human standards, the touching?" Honestly, I don't know. Human physical contact rules are complicated and context-dependent. But this, he gestured to her hand on his face, his hand covering hers. This feels appropriate, to me at least. Then we will proceed according to what feels appropriate rather than predetermined rules. This seems more honest. She lowered her hand, and Marcus felt the absence of contact like a physical loss. They were standing closer than professional distance required, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact with her superior height. "We should discuss practical matters," Kirzha said, though she didn't step back. "Our superiors have authorized us to explore this attraction honestly. But what does that mean? What are we attempting to discover?" Marcus considered. "I suppose we're trying to figure out if what we feel is genuine compatibility or just the result of proximity and isolation. Whether cross-species attraction can actually translate into," he paused, uncertain what word to use. "Into what? Partnership, bonding. Your species has many words for emotional connection, which applies here. I don't know. Maybe none of them. Maybe we need new words for whatever this is." Kirzha moved to the observation window, gesturing for Marcus to join her. Together they looked out over Kethara's harsh landscape, red stone and sparse vegetation, a world caught in permanent conflict. "Among Varathi," she said, "when attraction is acknowledged, we proceed through stages. First is assessment, determining if compatibility exists beyond initial interest. This involves direct questions about expectations, boundaries, long-term intentions." That sounds incredibly unromantic by human standards. Romance is deception by aesthetic means. We prefer clarity. She turned to face him. "So I will ask directly, what do you want from this attraction, Marcus Webb? Physical intimacy, emotional connection, long-term partnership. You must speak honestly about your desires or we cannot properly assess compatibility." The directness should have been jarring, but Marcus was learning to appreciate Varathi communication style. At least he always knew where he stood. He stopped, forced himself to really examine what he felt rather than what he thought he should say. "I want to know you beyond our professional roles. To understand what you think about beyond military strategy and diplomatic objectives. I want to spend time with you when neither of us is performing our designated functions." "You want companionship. More than that. He struggled to find honest words. "When you smile, which you do rarely and briefly, I feel something in my chest that has nothing to do with diplomatic success. When you challenge my ideas, I get energized rather than defensive. When you touch me, I want the contact to continue. So yes, companionship, but also attraction that includes physical desire, emotional investment, the whole complicated human mess of wanting someone." Kirzha listened with that intense focus that made Marcus feel like the most important thing in her universe. "Physical desire. You wish to mate with me." The bluntness made Marcus's face heat. "That's yes, eventually, maybe. If that's even possible between our species. I don't know the biology. It is possible. Challenging but possible. Varathi and human physiology are compatible enough for intimate contact, though differences exist that would require adaptation and communication." She tilted her head. "You are embarrassed. Your face shows increased blood flow. Why? Humans don't usually discuss sexual desire this directly, especially not with someone we've barely touched. But you desire me sexually. This is truth. Why conceal it with embarrassment? Because admitting it feels vulnerable. What if you don't feel the same way? What if I've misread the situation and you're only interested in intellectual companionship?" "I also experience physical attraction," Kirzha said matter-of-factly. "Your form is aesthetically pleasing by human standards, which translates to interesting to my perception. Your mind attracts me more than your body, but physical desire exists as component of overall interest. I would engage in intimate contact with you if circumstances permitted." She delivered this information with the same tone she might use to discuss tactical deployments, and somehow that made it more intimate than any poetic declaration could have been. "Okay," Marcus said, slightly breathless. "So we're mutually attracted physically and intellectually. That's good to establish. Now we must address practical complications. You are human, I am Varathi. You serve Earth Diplomatic Corps, I serve Varathi Military Command. Our cultures are fundamentally incompatible in many ways. Our physiologies differ significantly. The political ramifications of cross-species relationship between diplomatic counterparts are severe for both our careers. You're making a very compelling argument against pursuing this. I am stating obstacles honestly so we can determine if they are surmountable or insurmountable." Her expression shifted into something more serious. "I do not engage in relationships lightly, Marcus. If we proceed beyond mutual attraction into actual partnership, I will commit fully. Varathi do not practice casual connection. We bond completely or not at all. You must understand what you are agreeing to." "And what am I agreeing to?" "To partnership that supersedes professional obligations when they conflict. To honesty that may be painful or inconvenient. To commitment that does not waver because circumstances become difficult." She paused. "In Varathi culture, bonded partners are considered single unit. What affects one affects the other. Challenges to your honor become challenges to mine. Your failures reflect on me as mine reflect on you. This is not casual human dating. This is binding commitment." Marcus felt the weight of what she was describing. It was more serious than human engagement, closer to marriage but without the cultural ritual surrounding it. Just a decision to be bound, made honestly and completely. "That's terrifying," he admitted. "Yes, but is it acceptable to you?" He thought about his life before Cathara. 16 years of diplomatic service, where he'd carefully maintained professional distance from everyone, where relationships were strategic alliances or casual connections that dissolved when convenient, where he'd been successful and respected, and also fundamentally alone. He thought about the past week with Kirsha, the exhaustion of honesty mixed with the exhilaration of being truly seen. The way she challenged him to be better than his training, braver than his instincts. The unexpected joy of someone who never lied to him, even when truth was uncomfortable. "I don't know if I can commit to something that binding," he said slowly. "Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know if I'm capable of it. Humans aren't trained for that level of commitment. We're taught to preserve options, maintain independence, protect ourselves from complete vulnerability. Then you must decide if you can overcome that training, because I will not accept partial commitment. Either you are willing to be fully honest and fully present in this partnership, or we should acknowledge mutual attraction but not pursue it further." The ultimatum was delivered without anger or manipulation, just truth. Kirsha wouldn't compromise on this because compromise would violate her fundamental principles. Marcus could feel the decision point approaching like a physical force. He could step back now, preserve professional distance, protect his career and emotional safety. Or he could step forward into something terrifying and unprecedented and completely honest. His comm unit chimed. Director Chen, no doubt demanding another update, probably threatening more severe consequences for his continued defiance of orders. Marcus silenced it without looking. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "In a way I've never been honest with anyone. I'm terrified of what you're offering. Complete commitment, total honesty, binding partnership. Everything about it violates my training and cultural conditioning. I should refuse. I should protect myself and my career and maintain safe distance." He stepped closer to her, close enough to feel the slight temperature difference between their bodies. "But I don't want safe distance. I don't want careful self-protection. I want whatever this is between us, even if it's terrifying, even if it destroys my career, even if I don't fully understand what I'm agreeing to." He met her silver eyes directly. "I want to try. To commit fully, to be as honest as you need me to be, to see if I'm capable of the kind of partnership you're describing. I might fail. I might revert to human patterns of partial commitment and strategic self-preservation. But I want to try. Kirsha's expression transformed. That is sufficient, she said quietly. Perfect commitment is impossible. We are both flawed beings. But commitment to honesty about our flaws, willingness to try despite fear, this is what Shareth requires. This is what I require. She reached out and took both his hands in hers, the gesture formal and significant in ways Marcus didn't fully understand but felt the weight of. Among Varathi, when partners decide to bond, we perform Kethful, the unmasking. We remove our armor in each other's presence, demonstrating complete vulnerability and trust. This symbolizes our willingness to be undefended before our partner, to trust them with our most fragile self. Marcus's heart hammered. You want to remove your armor, now. If you will do the same. Not armor literally for you. Humans do not wear protective equipment constantly, but whatever symbolic armor you carry, whatever defenses you use to protect yourself from being fully known. She was asking him to be completely vulnerable, to strip away every diplomatic technique, every careful self-presentation, every protective layer he'd built over 16 years of professional service. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. I've spent so long hiding behind professional competence and diplomatic language that I don't know what's underneath anymore. Then we will discover together. Her hands tightened on his. Be brave and speak your mind, human. Tell me something you have never told anyone. Something you are ashamed of or frightened by or desperately wish were different. Give me truth that costs you something to speak. Marcus's mouth went dry. This was the real test, not whether he could admit attraction, but whether he could expose the parts of himself he'd kept hidden even from himself. I'm lonely, he heard himself say, the words falling into the space between them like dropped weapons. I've been lonely for most of my adult life. I'm good at my job, respected by colleagues, considered successful by every professional metric. But I have no real friends, no genuine connections, no one who knows me beyond the diplomatic persona I perform. I've built a career on being professional and distant, and somewhere along the way I forgot how to be anything else. The admission hurt to speak, like pulling shrapnel from a wound. But Kirsha's expression showed only acceptance, no judgment or pity. I've been terrified, he continued, the words coming faster now that he'd started, that I'm incapable of real connection. That I've trained myself so thoroughly to maintain distance that I've damaged something fundamental in myself. When I met you, when you forced me to be honest, I discovered I could still feel things deeply. That underneath all the diplomatic training, there's still a person capable of genuine emotion. And that terrifies me because it means I've been wasting years hiding from the very thing I needed most. He stopped, slightly shocked by his own honesty. He just confessed his deepest insecurity to an alien warrior he'd known for less than 2 weeks. Kirsha's hands released his, and for a moment Marcus thought he'd gone too far, shared too much. Then she reached for the seals of her ceremonial armor. I understand your loneliness, she said, beginning to remove the heavy shoulder plates. Varathi warriors are trained in isolation, discouraged from emotional attachment, taught that connection weakens combat effectiveness. I have spent my adult life surrounded by fellow soldiers and utterly alone. The shoulder plates came off, set aside with ceremonial care. Then the chest piece, unlocking with a sound like breaking promises. When you arrived, I expected typical human dishonesty. I anticipated frustration, probable execution of another lying diplomat, continued isolation in my professional excellence. She continued removing armor pieces, each one revealing more of the warrior beneath. Instead, you demonstrated capacity for honesty that challenged my assumptions about your species. You became interesting, then compelling, then necessary. The arm guards came off, then the leg plates, each piece of protection set aside deliberately. She was stripping herself of the armor that defined her role, her identity, her safety. I am frightened, she said, standing now in just the thin undersuit Varathi wore beneath their armor, "that I lack capacity for the emotional vulnerability you require. Warriors are not trained for partnership. We are trained for duty, hierarchy, obedience. I do not know if I can be what you need." She stood before him, physically imposing even without her armor, but also completely vulnerable in ways that transcended the physical. This was a Varathi commander removing her protection, admitting fear and uncertainty, choosing exposure over safety. Marcus felt something break open in his chest: recognition, connection, the profound understanding that they were both terrified and both choosing courage anyway. He began removing his formal jacket, the diplomatic uniform that had been his own armor. The vest beneath came next, then his tie, each piece of professional identity discarded until he stood in just his shirt and trousers. "I'm afraid," he said, matching her honesty with his own, "that I'll disappoint you, that my commitment will waver when things get difficult, that my human patterns of self-protection will resurface and betray what we're trying to build, that I'm not brave enough to be what you need." They stood facing each other, both stripped of their respective armors, both vulnerable and honest and terrified. Kirsha stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between them. She was still taller, still physically imposing, but also completely present in ways that made size irrelevant. "Then we will be frightened together," she said quietly. "We will fail occasionally, disappoint each other, struggle with our respective limitations. But we will do it honestly, without pretense or protective deception." Her hand found his face again, and this time Marcus leaned into the touch, his own hands rising to rest on her waist, where the undersuit revealed the reality of her body beneath the warrior persona. "This is terrifying," he repeated. "Truth often is." Her other hand joined the first, cradling his face between her palms. "But it is also real in ways comfortable fiction can never be. And I would rather be terrified and honest with you than safe and isolated." "So would I." They stood like that, holding each other carefully, both aware they were crossing boundaries that couldn't be uncrossed, both choosing to do it anyway. Marcus's comm unit chimed again, another message from his superiors, probably escalating their threats, demanding compliance with orders to maintain professional distance. He ignored it completely. "My career is finished," he said, not releasing his hold on Kirsha. "Earth Diplomatic Corps will recall me, probably court-martial me for insubordination and violation of professional conduct protocols. Everything I've built for 16 years is going to collapse." "Yes," she agreed. "And my superiors, despite their acceptance of Shareth, will likely find this partnership complicated and problematic. There will be consequences for both of us. Was it worth it, choosing honesty over safety?" She smiled, that expression that transformed her warrior's face into something softer, more vulnerable, more human despite her alien features. "Ask me again in 1 year. If we survive the consequences and remain bonded, then yes, it was worth it. If we fail and regret this decision, then no. But either way, it will be honest. We will know the truth, rather than wondering what might have been if we had chosen courage instead of safety. I can live with that uncertainty." "So can I." Marcus pulled her closer, and she allowed it, her hands sliding from his face to his shoulders, both of them navigating the physical differences between their species with careful attention. She was cooler than human body temperature, her skin textured differently, her proportions slightly wrong by human standards. She was also the most present, most honest, most real person he'd ever held. "What happens now?" he asked, his face pressed against her shoulder. "Practically speaking, we've committed to partnership, removed our metaphorical armor, acknowledged mutual attraction. What's next?" "Now we continue negotiations while also exploring this bond. We demonstrate that cross-species partnership can coexist with professional obligations. We prove to our respective commands that honesty strengthens rather than weakens diplomatic outcomes. And if we can't prove that, Then we fail spectacularly and become cautionary tale about why Varathian humans should maintain professional distance. She pulled back slightly to meet his eyes. But we fail honestly, having tried something unprecedented rather than hiding in safe cowardice. You make catastrophic failure sound almost appealing. Everything is more appealing when approached with honesty rather than fear. Marcus laughed, surprised and delighted by her absolute conviction. You're going to completely ruin me for normal human relationships, you know. After this, going back to careful diplomatic language and strategic emotional distance is going to feel suffocating. Good, you deserve better than suffocation disguised as civilization. They held each other for several more minutes, neither willing to release the contact, both aware that once they left this room they would face consequences, complications, and the harsh judgment of their respective cultures. But for now they had this. Two beings from incompatible worlds, stripped of their protective armor, choosing vulnerability over safety and honesty over comfort. It was terrifying. It was unprecedented. It was probably going to destroy both their careers and quite possibly end in disaster. It was also the most honest thing Marcus had done in his entire life. And as Kirzha's hand found his again, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that was becoming familiar and essential, Marcus realized he didn't regret any of it. Not the career destruction, not the professional complications, not the uncertainty about what came next. Because some things were worth the cost, worth defying orders and disappointing superiors, and accepting that the easy path was no longer available. Some things demanded courage. And standing in that meeting chamber, holding hands with a Varathi warrior who had forced him to be honest, and then matched his vulnerability with her own, Marcus felt braver than he'd felt in 16 years of careful diplomatic dishonesty. The negotiations would continue. Politics and war and the fate of colonies would demand their attention. Their superiors would impose consequences. The universe would judge their unprecedented partnership and likely find it wanting. But first they had this. Two hands clasped, two hearts honest, two beings brave enough to admit what they wanted and explore where that honesty led them. It was a beginning. Terrifying, exhilarating, completely without precedent. Exactly the kind of beginning that changed everything. We should probably get dressed, Marcus said eventually, reluctantly. Put our armor back on and face the consequences. Yes, but Kirzha didn't release his hand. But first, tell me one more truth. Something you want that you are afraid to ask for. Marcus thought about all the things he wanted. For the negotiations to succeed. For his career to somehow survive. For the attraction between them to be sustainable rather than just the product of isolation and stress. But that wasn't what she was asking for. She wanted personal truth, vulnerable confession. I want this to be real, he said quietly. I want what we found here to be genuine compatibility rather than just the result of proximity and cultural novelty. I want to be with you in 6 months and still feel this way, still excited by your honesty, still attracted to your mind and your presence, still choosing vulnerability over safety. I want this to last. Kirzha's expression softened completely, the warrior dissolving into the person underneath. So do I, she said, and it was possibly the most vulnerable admission she'd made. I want to discover if what I feel now is sustainable or if it will fade when novelty wears away. I want to be worthy of your honesty and your commitment. I want to be more than just the Varathi who forced you to speak truth. I want to be partner who chooses to stand with you when truth becomes difficult. Then we'll try, Marcus said. We'll be honest, we'll be brave, we'll fail occasionally and succeed sometimes, and we'll see if unprecedented cross-species partnership can actually work. Together. They began the process of rearmoring, Kirzha methodically replacing each piece of ceremonial protection, Marcus redressing in his diplomatic uniform. But something fundamental had changed. The armor didn't fit quite the same way now that they'd chosen to remove it, now that they knew what vulnerability felt like. When they were both fully dressed again, Kirsha paused at the door. "Tomorrow, we resume negotiations. Our superiors will be watching closely, judging whether personal connection strengthens or weakens our professional effectiveness. What do you think they'll find?" "I think they will find two beings who are committed to honesty in all aspects of their relationship, personal and professional. I think they will find that transparency and trust create better outcomes than strategic deception and careful distance." She smiled. "Or they will find that we were fools who destroyed our careers for romantic notion. Either way, we will know the truth. I'm starting to think you're addicted to truth. Truth is the only thing worth being addicted to." Marcus followed her out of the meeting chamber, acutely aware that everything had changed. He'd committed to partnership with an alien warrior. He'd defied direct orders from his superiors. He'd chosen honesty over career safety and vulnerability over protective distance. His comm unit showed 17 messages from Director Chen, each one apparently more threatening than the last based on the subject lines. He'd deal with those later, or possibly never. The idea of returning to careful diplomatic language after experiencing Varathi honesty felt impossible now. As Kirsha walked beside him through the corridors of the Varathi compound, not ahead of him as before, but beside him as equals, as partners, Marcus felt something settle in his chest that might have been peace or might have been acceptance. He'd found something in her honesty that he'd been missing his entire professional life. The freedom to be completely himself, flaws and fears and all, without pretense or performance. If that cost him his career, so be it. Some things were worth more than professional success. Some things, truth, courage, genuine connection, were worth everything. And as they reached the point where human and Varathi territories divided, where Marcus would return to his quarters and Kirsha to hers, she paused. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin demonstrating that honesty works, that cross-species partnership is possible, that choosing vulnerability over safety was correct decision. What if it wasn't? What if we've made terrible mistake? Then we will fail honestly and learn from that failure." She touched his face one more time, gentle and deliberate. "But I do not believe we have made mistake. I believe we have found something rare and valuable. And I will fight to preserve it. So will I. Then we are bonded in purpose as well as attraction. This is good beginning." She left and Marcus watched her go. This Varathi warrior who had forced him to be brave, and then matched his vulnerability with her own. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Court-martial, probably. Professional ruin, certainly. The harsh judgment of two cultures that couldn't understand what they'd chosen. But tonight, Marcus felt more alive and more honest than he'd felt in 16 years of careful diplomatic service. And that was worth everything they were about to face. Truth was terrifying, but it was also liberating, and whatever came next, at least it would be real.